Welcome to this week's episode of GRIDGIRL with me, Helena. This weekend marks the second round in Austria for the Styrian Grand Prix. There has been a lot of news in the paddock this week, and I'll be looking at the We Racers One campaign and the Hamilton Commission, along with Alonso's return to Renault. We Racers One is an initiative that the FIA has set up to support a number of causes since the coronavirus lockdown. The campaign aims to tackle racism and inequality within the sport, as well as being a response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Upon F1's return last weekend, you'll have seen a few changes throughout garages, on the track, and even on the tops of halos on cars. So you'll have seen a number of rainbows in support of key workers. One of the other things you'll have noticed around the track are the end racism messages, and we saw the drivers line up at the beginning of the race standing together to support the Black Lives Matter movement. 14 of the drivers decided to take the knee along with Lewis Hamilton in support at the beginning of the race, and the same again this weekend. But the big question that is being asked is F1 really doing enough to end inequality within the sport?
What I do see though is very much like when I was at school. I'd go to school as 1,500 kids, and I was one of maybe 5 or 6 black kids, and you feel quite alone, and the whole thing the feeling that you're led to not feel like you're particularly fit in into society, and when you walk into the paddock for one, there are very there might be 1 or 2 other people of colour in this whole paddock and in all the teams.
With F1's consistent response to coronavirus with projects like Project Pit Lane, there are big questions being asked on, is F1 really doing enough? And this has definitely been felt by driver Lewis Hamilton, as you saw in that interview. He has set up the Hamilton Commission, which is looking into diversity within the sport and what is the real reason behind the lack of diversity within the sport. One of his concerns is that not enough students of BAME backgrounds are looking at STEM subjects, which is then potentially showing that lack of diversity within engineers. And it's something that Hamilton is really passionate about. Although over the weekend the media then turned the standing together at the beginning of the race into a who took the knee and who didn't. 6 drivers chose not to take the knee, and all of them were questioned within the press as to why they didn't. Some of them have felt personal reasons as to why they've not done it, and I think Martin Brundle really hit the nail on the head with what he said in an interview on Sky Sports, saying that actually it's not the time for us to be arguing over who took the knee and who didn't. It's actually time for F1 as a sport to be really taking action and leading the way in terms of bringing that equality and diversity within the sport. The biggest news by far this week was the announcement by Renault that Fernando Alonso would be returning to F1 in 2021. It's been 3 years since Fernando took a hiatus from F1, and he's done a lot in that time. He's won the Le Mans 24-hour twice, he's won Daytona, he's even won the Formula E championships, and he really felt that it was time for him to come back. Obviously, he won his 2 world championships at Renault, so really it was more like a homecoming for him. Although this did raise questions over Renault's young driver programme, with the likes of Zoe and Lundgaard missing out on the possibility of a drive in 2021. Really, was this a shock? I think in some respects it was. We thought that seat potentially could have been earmarked by one of the younger drivers, or potentially other drivers on the grid, especially the likes of Sebastian Vettel, that was in talks with Renault up until this weekend, I guess, upon the announcement of Alonso coming back. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Alonso is now 40, so he's no spring chicken. However, he does still have that fire and passion within him to really fight for that front of the grid. So who knows? It'll be interesting to see what he brings into 2021 and, you know, what happens with the regulation changes the following year. In terms of wrapping up the rest of the paddock news, so this week Sebastian Vettel, talk of the town yet again. Where will he go in 2021? Well, this week saw interesting revelations after an interview that he gave on German TV show Autosport, where, you know, he was asked about potentially returning to Renault. And the rumour mill really started then at that point with Dietrich Mateschitz basically ringing him in the ad break and proclaiming widely within the media to look at bringing Sebastian home. It's been no real shock that Sebastian has spoken over the past few years about potentially wanting to return to his home at Red Bull, where he won his 4 World Championship titles. And really this again has been quashed this week by Christine Horner saying, look, we're not really interested in bringing Sebastian back. We are happy with the drivers that we have at the moment, obviously with Max Verstappen and Alex Albon, although Alex Albon isn't confirmed yet for 2021. Max Verstappen was also commented this week saying that he really wasn't interested in having Seb as a teammate, and, you know, who knows, will Helmut Marko give in? We just don't know. But then on Saturday, after qualifying, it started stirring up again after Sebastian was seen talking to Toto Wolff, team principal at Mercedes, after qualifying at the back of their motorhome. So could that mean Sebastian's looking at a move to Mercedes? I mean, Mercedes haven't signed Hamilton or Valtteri for next year, so it will be interesting to see. We also had the announcement of 2 races added to the calendar in September. So after we finish in Monza, we'll then have a race the following week at Mugello in Tuscany for the Tuscany Grand Prix. And then we will be heading over to Russia for the Russian Grand Prix in Sochi, which will be taking place on its original schedule. Again, hopefully we'll be hearing more about those race updates. So that now gives us 10 races, with the majority being back-to-back races. And finally, Ferrari upgrades. We saw aero upgrades brought this week on both cars. Did it make much of a difference? Not really, although Sebastian did say in his post-qualifying interview that the car did seem to run a bit better for him, and I think that was shown definitely in the qualifying results for him. However, it didn't seem to suit Leclerc. Rumours are that an engine upgrade is going to be brought to Hungary next week, but that hasn't been confirmed. So we'll have to wait and see. And also Claire Williams touched briefly on Channel 4 this week that they are in discussion over the sale of the Williams team, and that they have quite a few options on the table looking forward into 2021. This week saw a very interesting qualifying session again, especially in the rain and the weather conditions, certainly different to last weekend. We also saw Ferrari struggling again in qualifying, but McLaren really making gains and capitalising on that. Unfortunately, Q1 was red flagged, which meant Nicholas Latifi missed out on joining his Williams teammate George Russell. George had a phenomenal qualifying. He ended up qualifying on the grid 11th due to some grid penalties off other drivers. Ferrari, as I say, a terrible day. Sebastian improving very slightly up to 10th this week. And Leclerc, who started in 14th after taking a 3-place grid penalty. Not a great day for Ferrari, but as I said earlier, Sebastian did say the aero updates had improved the car slightly. Carlos Sainz qualifying third, so him and Lando having a bit of a role reversal this week. Unfortunately, Lando had a good qualifying session but didn't quite have a good starting position on the grid due to also receiving a 3-place grid penalty for overtaking on a yellow flag during free practice. A shame because both drivers have qualified quite well and are up on the pace up there with the likes of Red Bull, Racing Point, Renault, so they're really fighting for that best of the rest. We saw obviously Hamilton with a phenomenal lap. He was 1.2 seconds I think ahead of his teammate Bottas. Again, Max potentially could have overtaken him in the Red Bull. Unfortunately, he did have that spin at the end of his last lap in qualifying, meaning he didn't improve on his position. As I say, a few grid penalties and a few other bits going on kind of mixed the grid up again a bit, but definitely a very interesting qualifying to watch. Well, definitely an interesting race again, however, much less drama than last week with only 3 retirees this week. The 2 Ferraris with that crash during the first lap. Sebastian unfortunately rear-ended by his teammate Charles while he was trying to overtake on the hairpin. Charles accepted full responsibility in his post-race interview, stating that he kind of let the team down and how he kind of threw the chance out the window, especially with those aero updates they had this week. It would have been a great time for them to gather data going into Hungary and to see had it really made a difference to the car, obviously having a back-to-back at the same racetrack. We then saw Ocon unfortunately out with a similar issue to the issue that Ricciardo had last weekend. Looking like there's a problem potentially with the brakes that they've been going through. Again, they're looking at getting this fixed, as you know, Renault don't really need to be having reliability issues when they are looking to be best of the rest. McLaren, what a day. So we saw a great performance there from the team, and you know, really cementing, although they didn't get a podium this weekend, they did have a great performance, and especially Lando in those last few laps. So the last 2 laps saw him overtake both Racing Points through pure speed, and it was great to see again. You know, he was just off the podium. Obviously the Red Bulls and the Mercedes, you know, kind of were the leaders of the day, and you know, it's nice to see the improvement in McLaren. And you know, Lando is now 3rd in the World Championship, which if you'd asked me 12 months ago would he be 3rd, I probably would have laughed you out of the park. So brilliant to see. Again, interesting performances. I think George Russell had a bit of a knock, which probably got a bit overexcited and got caught up in that middle pack, which then unfortunately meant he didn't really finish that well. And again, the Ferrari teams are not doing great, so we saw Haas really struggle, and also Alfa Romeo, who are really struggling with this new engine. Hopefully going into Hungary, I think we are going to see some more upgrades from some of the teams. So, you know, watch this space. At the end of the race, we saw, and we're still waiting to hear on a protest that Renault have put in against Racing Point, saying that they have some kind of illegal feature on their car. We're still waiting to hear more about this. And then also came a bit of an announcement from Haas saying that Gunther Steinberg saying that he would be more than happy to sign Vettel for next year. Interesting, and I think it's well known that Gunther is not happy with his two drivers. We saw that last year on Drive to Survive when him and you know, Kevin really had that blowout. He's not overly impressed with Grosjean. Grosjean hasn't really been performing either, and it'll be interesting to see if that actually amounts to anything, but I don't think Sebastian would be likely to go to Haas unless he was really desperate to stay in F1. I think he would be more likely to retire. But who knows, obviously, as I mentioned before, we saw those talks with Toto Wolff, so we shall see.